Sure. Sure. What's that sitting there? Just sitting there?
It's an extra bundle.
It's not like savory, but...
No.
I thought today
Look at that scrap bag on the back of the door. I think that's time to get rid of that Friday night. That's
Do
overflowing.
you think?
That's overflowing. Okay.
Good morning. We're back.
Good morning. Has Barb said yet?
We're like
Hi
the
yet?
cat that comes back. Is anybody back with us?
Oh.
Maybe they all deserted
We've got
us.
17 on, but we haven't seen it. I guess
Somebody
I better say hi.
Somebody say hi to us.
There.
Okay.
Wendy Levo said,
Long time no see.
Good morning, Barb.
Morning, Barb. Sharon. We got to stop mentioning names or we're going to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm back, Lynn.
So this is a beginner series. And today we're going to a little bit of mishmash.
Yes, we do.
Like just a few odds and ends just to sort of keep moving along with some different things. So we've already talked about like picking fabric, different cuts of fabric, cutting. What did we do last week? The last time?
Ironing.
Oh yeah, pressing.
Pressing. Sorry, Linda.
So today I thought we'd talk a little bit about a few things in a pattern that a new person sewing may not know. And then we're going to talk a little bit about starting to piece blocks and lining up points and nesting seams and some things like that. So just a couple odd things to start with is...
Can I make a point?
You can make as many points as you want.
Have you ever watched those sew-alongs with the people that are really professional? Like, because we're not professional, but people that really plan these out and really do good. Look at our backdrop.
I know. Isn't that neat? Maybe we could close the closet door.
Oh, we look like we're a mess.
That's because we are a mess. We should show you the floor. If you think the room is a mess.
I was so in love.
This is like, you know how, like, you know Einstein, how he looks? Well, this is Deb in her creative space here, and it's like... Anyway, okay, so I want to talk first off a little bit about patterns. So when you purchase a pattern, even if you're looking online, quite often online, there is a second picture that you can pull up before you even purchase the pattern that will give you a screenshot of the back of the pattern or the fabric requirements so that you would be able to look ahead and know whether what you've got in your stash or what you've got to purchase before you get your pattern. So that's always helpful to know. So your fabric requirements, and when you go in a store to buy a pattern, it typically is on the back of the pattern. So if it's in a package, you don't have to open the package or whatever. So your fabric requirements are usually listed there. It quite often will tell you, you remember we talked about layer cakes, fat quarter bundles, like all the different pre-cuts that are pre-packaged by the manufacturers. It quite often will actually tell you if it's a friendly pattern for layer cakes, like layer cake friendly or fat quarter friendly or jelly roll friendly. But you can also read, and if it's only listed in yardage, that you need like, you know, 1.5 meters of this and 2/3 of a meter of that, chances are you're not going to be able to make that work with one of your pre-cut bundles. So just keep that in mind to look there. Another thing to point out is that once you start to read your pattern, lots of times there's a few phrases that you may not understand if you've never dealt with a pattern before. So here, I can't give you all of these, but just to give you an idea, all of these long lines starts by telling you to cut a certain fabric, fabric A, WOF. So like a 2.5 by WOF. So
that got Stacy going for a while. He didn't know
he
it.
did. Well, that's like we take a lot of this for granted, but if
granted.
you have never sewn or read patterns before, some of those terms. So that's with the fabric. So lots of times it is listed that you take your fabric and you cut a long strip with the fabric off of it a certain size, and then it will list below that how you're going to subcut that into smaller segments. So you may be starting by cutting a 2.5-inch strip with the fabric. So with the fabric on your bolt is, oh, here's a bolt right here. So when you get your fabric cut at the fabric store, if you had bought a 1/4 meter cut, we would cut a 1/4 meter this way. So this is what they're referring to with the fabric. So when you got that piece home, if you were going to cut a 2.5 inch with the fabric, you're going to take your ruler and your mat and cut a 2.5 inch strip, and then subcut it in however it's listed. It may be listed that you need 10 that are 2.5 by 2.5. You may need 6 that are 2.5 by 4.5. So then you just subcut as it lists below that.
Sometimes the patterns look overwhelming
They do.
because you sit there and you try to figure out everything before you start cutting, and that gets overwhelming in your head. Lots of times if you start on step 1 and just do exactly what step 1
Without looking ahead.
without looking ahead, sometimes just start at the beginning.
Now, that being said, I
Yeah, I
know
know.
that there are some people's minds out there
That
that
can do
need to get a bigger picture and that they can grasp that. But I'm with you. I'm one of these people that if I look too far in
It
advance,
just
it isn't making
panics me.
sense
My
to me.
stomach's like, oh,
Yeah,
I'm not
'cause-
doing this.
Yeah, so I agree with Deb. I typically take step 1 and do what step 1 says. If it's something that I can't just go by the picture, because I go by the picture a lot.
I do too.
So the other thing I want to show you is oftentimes a pattern is giving you different sizes. So even though this block could be made as a 6-inch block, it may also be able to be made as a 12-inch block in the same pattern. So as a beginner, just as an example, and I've got to cover up the actual, oops, I got a few
We
things
don't
showing I
want to
shouldn't be
wreck our
showing.
copyright laws here.
Oops, there. Am I in the right place? Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
Okay, so in this book,
Do you want me to hold something?
well, number one, I want to get rid of this because I shouldn't be showing.
Here, I'll
Okay,
hold. You hold
yes.
the book, and I'll hold this.
So this is the block, and if you look here, it tells you that there is a 6-inch size and a 12-inch size. So the cutting directions are listed under here for the 6-inch size, and the cutting direction is listed under here for the 12-inch size. But as you get further into the pattern,
Down here.
as you're making the block, can you point to it?
Yeah.
Because I can't
So
read.
this would be the first
The
measurement.
first
you're coming
measurements
to.
that it tells you that it's going to make a block that size
Yeah.
is for the smallest block.
And the
and
next one in brackets.
In brackets is for the bigger size. So if you were making the 12-inch size, you would follow what's in the secondary brackets. Sometimes some patterns even have like 3 sizes.
Yeah,
So then it would be, you just go by smallest to largest over, follow those over. So that's a little confusing until you know it. Okay, so once you learn a few of those things about patterns, a lot of times a pattern will break things down and tell you that at the end of this certain stage, what your block should measure before you move on to the next stage. And as a experienced sewer, lots of times
it doesn't happen.
it doesn't happen and I don't sweat it. But as a starter sewer, it may be good if you just sort of check that you're in the ballpark, because if you've made a mistake cutting or sewing and you go too far with it and it's like way off for some reason, you may catch it at those stages. So do a quick check on that at that stage you are roughly where you're supposed to be, right? And we talked about that a little bit with our seam allowance, that not everybody's is 100% perfect. I know mine are almost always running a hair on the small side, always. But that's the foot I prefer to sew with, and so I deal with it. But anyway, you should be in the ballpark of each section of how it's supposed to measure.
That doesn't surprise us, Lynn. She
What?
measures after each block.
Yeah, and a lot of people
A lot of
square
people do.
up after each one, and that is a common practice, that if you're joining 4 pieces together, and when they're joined together, it's supposed to measure 4.5 inches square. A lot of people take their ruler and lay it on and square it up. But we're going to talk a little bit about squaring up in another one and about different things
3 or
like
4
that.
weeks.
Yeah, we're going to talk about squaring up, different ways to square up, because there's a few different options there too. Anyway, we're going to talk today about getting started sewing and nesting seams and lining things up and whatever. So Deb's going to show you a few things.
Oh, I'm going first.
Just
am I?
some basics. Well, I'm going to hold the camera
Okay.
while we do some things.
Okay.
So we can start with talking about,
Do you want to do the 9 patch first? 'Cause
Yeah.
we can hold up.
yeah. So you've probably heard a lot of sewers talk about nesting seams. So all that refers to is that, oh yeah, that was the other thing we were going to show. In your pattern, there are arrows. And it shows you, according to the arrows, I'm trying to show you arrows without giving a whole pattern
they
away.
won't get that. They should be okay.
Yeah. So if you look here at this flying geese right here, see how the arrows are pointing in a certain direction? That is telling you how you iron the seam. You're ironing in the direction that the arrow is pointing. So now I want to show you another one here that when they put, so when they're putting this middle sashing together, there are arrows over here showing you which way you're ironing each seam. Okay, so follow. Those ironing directions are there to make it easier to nest and for your blocks to fit together without bulky seams all coming together. If for some reason it's asking those seams to be bulky or to come together that way, there's usually a reason for the pattern designer to list it that way. Again, not everybody follows that. Some people.
I can't imagine who.
I can't either, but you know, some people don't even pay attention
Don't
to that.
even.
But if you're starting out and trying to get accurate nesting and accurate seam points lined up, that is a good place to start, is to follow your ironing directions in the pattern. So in a basic 9 patch, which I'm sure you guys do know what that is, a basic 9 patch has 5 blocks that are typically the same color and then 4 blocks that way, but it can be all mixture of colors. So if your top row is all pressed this way, so they're going that way. When you go to add your second row,
you want them to go the opposite.
You want it to go the opposite way when you lay your 2 right sides together. So when I put them together this way, can you see that, where am I? Can you see that my seams are going the same way? So that isn't going to help us nest. Can you point?
Yeah,
can they see
yeah,
that?
you can see that. It's a really good choice. Right, they're both going this way.
Yeah. So if you take this and flip it end to end,
you can see one is going this way and one is going that way.
And so then we're going to unhook the thing, and Deb's going to show you how to sort of fudge those and edge them together and whatever. So here, let me get the camera. Okay. Okay. So you can pin when you start if you need to, but nesting seams, one of the things I like about it is that it kind of eliminates
pins.
So
I ride it on top of each other and I slide it back until I feel that bump.
Till she feels it sort of go over the hump.
And look, it meets perfectly because Twyla cut it perfectly.
So another thing, I like to keep my finger on it as I'm moving it up towards the sewing machine, because I don't know whether we talked about this yet or not, but these little lovely things down here are the feed dogs. So any fabric that's on the bottom, unless you have a machine that has a, what's it called? The top foot.
The top foot?
That moves. What's it called? Walking foot. Yeah. Mine went blank. Unless you have a walking foot on the top, which evens out your fabric top and bottom moving at the same rate, your feed dogs have a tendency to pull the bottom fabric through a bit quicker than the top fabric goes through.
So I like to sew in 2 stitches and then double check.
That your little knot.
And then I let it go up and bring it back down.
So she's letting it ride up and then she's bringing it down to hook over that little fold, and she's keeping her finger on it.
And then once I know that I'm hooked right there at that seam, I come ahead and I feel
She's bringing it. See how she do that again, Deb? She brought it up, and now she's sliding it till that little hump falls down over. And her seams are nesting perfectly.
Look at that.
We used the wrong rows.
Gotta love that laugh.
Anyway, it showed nesting seams. That's all it had to show anyway. Yeah. So it shows the seams nesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's another thing. If you think, open that up. Open that up, please. So there are these things called fork pins. And that is supposedly what they're made for, is to line up. So you don't just use one pin. You're using a leg of the pin on either side of the seam.
Do you have another one I can do that too? Or can I just take that apart?
Yeah, that one. So we're going to have the cutest 9-patch ever, Lynn.
So I've got to figure out how to do it because these are going the same way. I don't want to do it that way.
Yeah. So yes, ignore that we messed up our block. We're just talking about nesting seams. So I want to show you when you get to this point. I personally do not like to insert those and bring them out the other side like a normal pin.
You just go in?
No. Go from this way. I go from this way. This is what I do. Yeah, but just here, you hold this.
Okay.
So this is what I do.
I never use fork pins.
No, I don't. I don't use them often. But if you like them, so you feel it, get it where you want it, and then I just put it that far, just to hold it. I don't do that. Okay. Because if you do it just here, that little bit, you can pretty much sew right past it without even pulling it out, and you're not going over your needle. Ooh. Whereas if you go through, you've almost got to pull it out when you get to the critical spot, right? So I just stick it like that, one leg on each side of the seam to hold it. Oh. And I do it quite close to the edge so that when I get there, my needle won't be hitting them, those little prongs that are just barely holding it in there, like that. That's what I do. So that's just...
But some people put it all
Some people put it all the way through. Yeah. So I just wanted to show that. So those are called fork pins. Yeah. Yeah, Lynn says she uses these all the time. So these are fork pins. So you can do it either way. Yep. Or you can use normal pins, but I want to show you with normal pins, thickness makes a difference.
It does.
So in here, I want to show you. I'm not saying you got to buy the most expensive pins going, but just a very generic, I wonder if that's going to show.
Yes, it will. Look at the
difference. See how thick the shank on that is compared to that one? And I find if you're using, and if they're not very sharp too, it makes a difference.
It pushes it.
I find it pushes or nudges the fabric out of line if you're trying to use something too thick. So try to find a thinner pin.
Do you like a longer pin or a shorter pin?
And I like these, and they're very thin. Even thinner.
Oh, they're thinner than the magic pen even.
So there's pros and cons to these.
They bend easy.
They bend much easier, but they go through the fabric like butter without distorting it at all. They're sharper. I really, really like them. I don't mind these. These have the positive that you can iron over the end of them because
they're easier to grasp.
They're easier to grasp than the little ball-headed, but these are my favorite. These are a bit sturdier. Okay, then there's also the controversy of whether you sew over pins or not.
Oh yeah, what do you do? Truthfully,
I sew over pins.
I find if you stop just before it and
go slower,
go slow, and just kind of let your needle fall, don't go speeding over it. Yeah, that it's fine.
So the danger of there's a couple things that they say. Number one, it can break your needle, and your needle can go flying. So there's a danger, like there's horror stories out there. You know how people slice off fingers with rotary cutters? Well, there's horror stories of needles going flying and landing in people's eyes or whatever. So you're not really supposed to do that. But if I absolutely have a really tricky spot that I've already seam ripped about 4 times and I'm fed up, I will take out my pins and use them, but I will sew over it. But I do exactly what you said. I'll sew my speed, but when I get to the pin, I slow right down until I'm over it.
You can almost make it like you're turning your wheel to get over it. Yeah. That's slow.
So now another tip, hold this for 1 minute. If you don't want to sew over your pins and you're pinning in a typical fashion, I just got to put it up here just till I get it because I couldn't see down there. My eyes are so bad. So if you're pinning in a typical fashion, when you sew down here, your pin, but if you leave it there right to the last minute, is going to be up under your presser foot, and sometimes it's hard to pull out. So quite often, if I am pinning, I pin on an angle.
Oh, really?
I pin this way, which I can't do this when I'm not in front of it. I'm working sideways. So I can leave my pin in longer. I can get down here, get almost to it, and it's not over it enough to hold it, and then it's easy to get out.
That's a good tip.
So that's
because going over your machine can take the timing out of
your machine. It can take the timing.
Especially if you're going fast.
Especially, so if you have I think that it's even trickier if you have computerized machines than a mechanical machine, but it can do it on any. But so those are just a couple little tips.
Susan wants to know if those yellow pins were glass. Yeah, I think they are.
They are.
They are.
They are. So then, besides the nesting seams, there is the...
Oh, well, you're doing a good job.
You're doing fine. Yeah, me standing up here working sideways. So then there is, if you happen to prefer to press your seams open. So that's what that is. So there are the pros of pressing open is that you get a much flatter seam.
Shorten your stitch.
Yes, but you should always shorten your stitch length. The cons, people are concerned about when it's being quilted, that it's not as strong. But I think that has mainly been put to rest nowadays.
I think if you've got a short stitch, it's
a
put
short
to rest.
stitch, and I think that thread quality is so much better nowadays than it used to be, right?
Yeah. But some people that have a wide open stitch, you can get pieces of batting come up.
And it's and you can actually see between the stitches, like you see gaping holes. Yeah. So shorten your stitch length. So then you just got to line up those two little, my finger is so fat.
So's your knees.
Well, yes, they are, Deborah. Those two little seams have got to line up. So I find these harder to keep lined up without pins, don't you, than nesting?
Yes, I do. I find it. So I would have to use a fork pin on this if that was me. Yeah,
a fork pin or just one pin on one side to hold it. Because when it nests, it's like it locks together.
It kind of slides down and locks into it.
Yeah, and locks into place. Whereas this, with your feed dogs pulling the bottom fabric a little bit quicker than the top, by the time you get there, sometimes it's shifted it just enough that it's not lined up. So I would certainly pin a little bit probably on that.
Yeah.
So that's the difference there.
We're going to show them about your strip unit.
Okay. So if you are cutting, but let's get this one that isn't all messed up, that we can actually make it our actual
block
9 patch.
Okay.
So if you're making a pattern that is calling for, like, say, 2.5 inch squares to make a 9 patch, and you need 5 of one color and 4 of the other, those can all be cut individually.
Into long strips.
Well, they can be cut individually into squares.
Yes.
And then put together. But that's a little bit friggy. So you can strip piece. And as you get going, you will learn to read patterns.
You'll become a stripper.
You'll become a stripper. So what you do, there is a strip piece. So instead of cutting your individual squares like that, you cut 2.5 inch strips.
With the fabric.
And sew them together. Or if you're just making one block, all I need is a piece like that size, or big enough to cut 2 of these units like that, right? That's all I need. So you can sew them together and then take your ruler and cut in 2.5 inch strips this way. And there, I find them more accurate.
Well, the one thing I've heard people say about sewing strip sets is sometimes they find their strip sets go wonky. My trick for doing a wonky, not getting a wonky strip, is when you have a long strip here, some people just leave it up here, or some people leave it here, whatever. If you spread your legs open and sit in front of your machine and let it hang completely straight in front of you, and let the machine feed it through, and don't twist it or move it or manipulate it, I never have a trouble with my strips becoming wonky, because it's feeding in there straight. It's not going to be wonky.
So another tip is, some people find when they sew strips together, if they always start at the same end.
Yes.
So if you sew this strip from here and end to here, when I add this strip, if I ended here, I start sewing
on the opposite.
Do
you really
end.
Do that?
Yeah, I do.
Do you really?
I do.
I never do that. But I've heard a lot of people that do it.
It's just automatic to me now that when I get to the end and I grab it here and I'm picking up another piece, I hold that as my top and add it, because it was the last thing that went through, so it was the bottom.
Okay.
That's just my habit.
Well, the reason I don't like to do that is because I have 2 wonky ends instead of one straight edge.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if you're short on fabric or you're just
Right.
skimping by,
Right.
sometimes you don't want to have too wonky ends. You want to be able
Yeah.
to get the most out of your fabric. And that's,
Yeah.
as long as I'm holding it straight between my legs, I don't mind. But everybody does what
Yeah.
works for them, right?
Now, if it's a 3 patch and you've got 3 pieces, I would cut it apart like this. If it's only 2 pieces that you're putting together for some reason, I cut mine apart before I iron them open.
So do I. I do too.
Because I find it's more accurate.
Yeah.
I find if you've got a whole width of fabric strip like this, even using a ruler, after you do a few,
You got to straighten up.
you got to straighten up. And we don't have a ruler in here because I try to keep a ruler line following one of these lines.
Do you want me to go get a ruler?
But after you make about 3 cuts, you may have to make like a little cleansing cut that straightens up your edge again.
Here's one here. Show them what they need.
So Susan, your stitch length is a very personal preference, but, and a lot of beginners probably don't know this either. Susan, I know you know this, but most quilters do not do back stitches at the start and end of their seams. They just stitch. So a shorter stitch length is beneficial because your end of your seams won't start to come undone as easy when you're piecing your blocks together. Especially if you have to pull them a bit, like if they're not 100% square and you're pulling it a little bit, one compared to the other. So a shorter stitch length is beneficial for that.
So you're talking, when you're cutting your strips, you're actually keeping this line here, right
I
along
am.
there.
I am.
That'll keep you really straight.
It does. But I
Instead of-
still find that after you do a few,
Few.
sometimes you will have to do a cleansing cut because you'll notice you're getting a little bit, like this may be straight, but then this over here may be a little bit wonky.
Yeah. So first of all, we lay it and use the lines on our mat to get a straight edge. But then every time you go over, take note of a line. Doesn't matter which line.
Yeah.
Just take note of a line to keep your blocks straight.
Yeah. So Susan, a lot of people recommend a stitch length of 2 for piecing. I'm one of the weird ones that does really short. I do 1.5.
Do you really?
I do, but man, it's a pain if you
you
have
gotta
to
take a-
seam rip it. Oh, it's bad. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad.
I should go get my seam ripper and take that apart and show people my seam ripper.
Oh yeah, I bet
never
that some of the
thought.
new people probably wouldn't know about that. Yeah, well, so we're going to show you the neatest seam ripper. So typically you have your, well, she probably doesn't even have, like Deb doesn't very often have to seam rip. I don't even see a typical seam ripper, but you guys all know what a seam ripper is. But Deb likes to use it's called electric, which I don't know why it's called electric because it's run by batteries.
Okay, I'm going to show you something.
Okay, so these are the niftiest rigs.
I like them.
You might want to do one of your blocks instead of one of mine because mine are.
So I usually put it on my lap.
You're going to have trouble with mine because the stitch length is so small.
Oh, I don't think.
So you see this?
I like to hold it upside down. And I just go along like this.
Look at that. Just look. Isn't that nifty?
But I want, okay, so that's my go-to. I use that all the time. But some people, I'm going to figure out how
I
to do it.
can't do it.
I know. Some people do this. Some people slide it in, put their ball under here.
Yeah. And there's a way to slide that it just does the whole seam. But I have
Sally
never.
Wittenberg.
Can do that.
Yeah. Like
I cannot do it.
You can do it.
Every time I try to
Some
do it,
people will
I
go
mess
like
it
this
up.
and pick out a stitch, and that works too, right? That's
Yeah.
monotonous to me. I like my ripper, but you can take your seam ripper and put the
They
ball
say
in
that's what
there.
the ball is for.
Is to ride down in
Is to
there,
ride down in there.
and it does work.
Yes, Kim, you can shave your legs with that too if you want
Yeah,
to.
you can shave just about anything.
Okay.
You want to try? Oh, my armpits.
So those are really, really nifty
Those
little
are
tools.
nice tools. I
They
like
really
them.
are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is basically nesting and whatnot. So now we're going to talk a little bit about points.
Yes, we are. So I whipped up 4 stars last night because I wanted to show you about putting rows together. Let's get this little thing out of there. We'll do that one after. So I've joined these 2 together like that. And I'm going to join these two together. Just put those in now.
So, one of the things you have to watch when you're sewing points together is that you don't lose your points.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to show here. If you see, it's harder to see because my seam's covering it, but my point stops right there. So I don't want my stitch to come here. I want my stitch to go in there before that point. If you go in before the point, you will never lose your point. So I know roughly where it is. I mean, you can even put a pin there.
Mm-hmm.
See here where my point is? I'm going to flip this down so you can see it when I come to it. See, I see where my point is. It's right there. And even if I have to, see how I've kind of gone out and jagged a little bit? I don't want to sew that point over.
So part of doing accurate 1/4 inch seam allowances is what will allow you to have a 1/4 of an inch here anyway, which is what you're supposed to have, so that when you take your seam, you don't lose that. But let's all be honest. We all have blocks that there isn't a 1/4 of an inch there.
Yes, it happens.
So when that happens, like look at your block before you start sewing. And if you've got one of those, when you get ready to sew, it may just be a matter of pulling that fabric over a hair, and you're going to actually have a smaller seam allowance on that one block.
If you do that once in a while, it's not going to make
It's not the end of the world.
So now I want to join these together. I had
Where
it
did you
on
do
here.
that?
It's right here.
Okay.
I want to join this together with the lattice. And typically, that's what you would think you would do.
Is one long strip.
One long strip.
So these strips between the blocks and between a row is called lattice for a new quilter.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So you might think that this is the best way to put a piece of lattice in, but I find when you're putting a piece of lattice in, it's easy to get it so that your points, your seams are off. This one's up a little bit, and that's
so that
down
when
a
you
bit.
actually look at your quilt, like if it's hanging on a wall, you might have like one star that's a hair down below the other star.
And sometimes you see that right off in a project.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was to sew this here, I would actually take and go over here and mark here with a pencil so that I knew that's exactly where.
So you could take like your long ruler like she just had. What did she do with
it?
And just follow that across those two lines.
And put a little pencil mark there so you know
on your
that
seam
that's
allowance
where your
on
seam has.
both sides of your sashing so that you know where to line up.
But what I found is easier and better is if I was to replace this with a square, the same color, because there's seams all around here. That seam does not stand out, but that ensures that
you're going to be able to nest.
You can nest every time.
So what it means is whatever length you cut these
8.5
is what you're going to cut.
You're going to cut this at
8.5
and this at 8.5, and you're going to put a 2.5 inch square in here.
If your sashing was 2.5 inches wide,
exactly,
put a 2.5 inch square.
And then you always have a seam to butt up, and then your squares are your stars are perfectly square all the time.
Yeah.
So some people like to put a colored here because it adds interest to the whole layout. I tend to like to have the same color there so it doesn't look like I've done that.
Yes, your corner block, which is what this is referred to as a corner block, is quite often an accent color. But you can make it plain.
And sometimes people put like a little 4 square in there.
Yes.
Like you can decorate that up.
Yes. Yeah, you can. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I always tend to, and you know what I've done before in the past is I've actually, if this was an 8.5 here, I've actually made this into a flying geese here.
Yes.
Put points there.
Yeah.
And put that there, and put points here.
Yeah.
And made that into a mini star.
Yeah.
Just to add more interest.
It's sharp. Yeah, it is. So we're going to get into borders and stuff, but your problem with a long sashing is it's also very much like a border, that it can get wonky pretty quick because it's a long strip of fabric.
You have to measure them so accurately that...
And it isn't always right to necessarily cut your sashing exactly what the pattern told you. Because if your blocks are all off by like 1/8 of an inch, and you've got 8 blocks going across, all off 1/8 of an inch, you're off an inch by the end of that row.
And that's another reason that I don't pre-cut before I start sewing a whole pattern. Because I like to do step 1 because if there's any difference along the way, that's going to reflect on some of
Yeah.
your cutting.
So what happens if you just cut according to what the pattern says and your blocks were off, so then your sashing is a bit longer than your
Or
than
a
your
bit
blocks.
shorter.
Then you've got fullness that's got to be eased in one place or another. And where that creates the most problem is when it comes time to quilt it, right? You get into some real issues. But we're going to talk about measuring borders and different ways to get accurate borders and stuff in a later thing too.
So it's simple when you're doing seams that nest to get your points. But when you're trying to make your points when you're on an angle, I did one that's not. See how that doesn't quite meet?
Yes.
But this one is pretty darn close,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So what's your tip?
Well, my tip, trial and error. Lots of times, if I'm doing something that's not working, I will lengthen my stitch and sew it in that way to see if my seams are going to match, and then I'll go back and restitch it at a smaller one. If you're fighting with matching, I do that. Oh, Wally.
Wally's up.
Yeah. So if you have something that's got to be joined like this, you can't nest those seams like you normally do. So there's a couple of options. You can either take this and trace on a 1/4 inch line on both sides.
Yeah.
Or you can eye it. So if I was going to do, did you put your pins away? Your straight pins? Let's grab one of those. Once you do a few, you kind of get used to it. But if I'm going to flip, and we're going to show you how to do 45-degree cutting when we do cutting, because when I was doing it today, Lone Stars, we would have to teach them 45-degree cutting, but we would also have to teach them Y seams. And a Lone Star made in scraps is gorgeous.
It's gorgeous. It is.
So it would be a good way to use up your 2.5-inch strips, random strips. So when we get to doing that, we'll show you how to, it's easy. This is so easy to do once you do it. So I come down 1/4 inch and put my pin in there. And then wherever I'm going in on this side, I come down 1/4 inch and put a pin there.
So if anybody watches YouTube, Kimberly Jolly calls this the poke-a-pin method.
Oh, is that what she calls it?
Yeah. And it works perfect.
It does. So I'm going to come down 1/4 inch.
And you're going right in that seam.
Right in
at
the seam.
1/4 inch.
Right in there.
And then those pins are going to ensure that it lines those
right
two
up.
seams up.
So if you haven't come down 1/4 inch, when you get to sewing over it, you're going to be sewing beyond it.
So that's where if you actually took your
Draw.
pin, and you don't even have to draw a line the whole way, you just have to draw it over the seam.
Exactly.
On both
let's do that.
sides with 1/4 inch, then you know exactly where your 1/4 inch seam is. You're not guessing it when you poke your pin.
I'm going to take this out and show you what we mean.
Shirley says, I just traced all the 1/4 inch markings on 7-point Lone Star last night.
Oh, did you really? So what we would do is we would put a little knit there.
Yeah.
You got to make sure you get in, because the width of your pin can make a difference.
Yeah. And one on the other side.
I've actually never done this. I've always just eyed it.
Yeah.
So I hope this works out. So now we know, there's my 1/4 inch right there. And I know I'm putting this right through that pin
So
mark
she's
right
lining
there.
the pin is going through the 2 marks on each side.
And we're pinning it.
Mm-hmm.
Pinning it. I might not be right on there. It's pretty close. There. So, and you always have to have an extension out here, or else it's not going to work. Sometimes you have to pull it a bit, especially because you're on 45 degrees. You got bias.
And where you have that little V is supposed to be
a
your
1/4
1/4 inch
starting
and where
point.
you start your needle.
So I'm going to come up to my pin, And just before I get it, I'm going to sew right over that pen mark.
This will be fun to see what
I
this
know.
actually lines up or not. Oh dear.
Do you want to lay that? Do you want to lay odds? I've never used a pen before. I mean, the marking
Yeah, but
pen.
you know, if anything's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong on a video. You know that, right?
I know. And so I've got my 1/4 inch
Yeah,
down
so
here.
she's aiming for that little V.
And I'm aiming right in there.
Let's see, what's the verdict? I'll turn the camera away while you check it out.
Oh, we're pretty good.
Okay, here we go.
Our points are pretty
Yeah,
close.
the other one looks better, I think.
Yeah, this one's
look
better.
at that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect.
So it's just trial and error. So
Yeah.
just measure down your point if you don't want to eyeball it and sew right over it.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, so was there anything?
It's been kind of a long class, hasn't it?
Well, no, not really, because we've done 2, right?
Yeah.
It's not 10 yet. We've done 2
Oh, okay.
classes. So let's see. Let me. If there was anything
looking at your
else.
notes.
I don't think. I think that pretty much covers it.
I'll put that back in.
I do believe that we're.
Okay.
That's
Anybody
enough
have...
info to throw at people in one day.
Yes. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
Anybody got questions?
What are we going to call this?
Yes, I know, Shirley. The width of your pen makes a big difference, and I think
So,
a fine point
What
marker
I
would work
find
better than a
works
pen.
if I'm marking anything is when I'm marking my 1/4 inch, I put the 1/4 inch mark on my ruler just outside the edge of my fabric.
So that your
just
pen-
barely, and that seems to almost account for the width of the pin on the other side.
That's
the
true,
pen
and
on the
I
other
put
side.
it right on because I'm
Yeah.
not used to marking.
That's what I do. I take my 1/4 inch line and just set it along the edge of the fabric and then mark, and it seems to account for the width of the pencil or pen or whatever you're using.
Yeah, because my second one was off
Yeah.
just a bit.
And I find a mechanical pencil has a finer lead and
That's true.
makes a tinier line and seems to be more accurate.
So
Okay. Did we miss any major questions?
yeah, I know. Shirley says she can do a length of a seam in like 8 seconds.
I have never conquered that. And
Oh.
I have not, like, not the, she's talking with the seam ripper. With the
With the
ball.
seam ripper?
Yes. Isn't that what she's talking? The
Oh
clover.
yes. Oh, I can never.
I
do
have
that.
never conquered that.
No.
Never.
Thread weight affects your seam also. Yes, we went over that last week. The thread weight.
Yes. It
And,
definitely
it does make a big difference.
Yeah, it does. The thicker your thread, you're going to
Yeah.
have a bulkier seam than a thinner thread. Yeah. Okay.
So that's it. Next week we're going to come back with another interruption block.
Mm-hmm.
We have the interruption blocks probably for 3 more weeks. And
Then we should be ready for the pattern.
yes. Hi Janet. I didn't see you on
Okay.
there earlier.
There we go. We're done.
Kansas is on there. First time. Oh, sorry, Alicia.
Our what?
It's the first time she's been on. Look at our messy room. We should have impressed somebody.
Oh. It's a
Yes, we are.
working room.
Yeah. So we are going to show how to use a few different rulers in the coming future.
Yes, we will.
Some
Some of the really
of our-
handy ones to, like, if
Yeah.
you're going as a beginner sewer, some of the best
Yeah.
ones to invest in. We'll show some of those. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Deanna is new. The block is new too.
Okay.
Okay. So the show is every Wednesday at 9 o'clock. So I'm not sure, Alicia, if you saw our first one at 9 o'clock. That's our Christmas sew along.
And that was posted. It will be posted separately, just so it's easier
Yeah.
to identify these
And that,
2 videos.
yeah, and so these videos stay up forever.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll be able to go on our page under videos and find us.
Mm-hmm.
The sew along, we're on week 3, but it's not too late because the weeks are there and we've got lots of weeks ahead. So if you want to join in on the sew along, it's not too late.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I will get
The
now,
email
Don't
sent.
expect it in the next 30 seconds. Just say it. It will get
Because she
done.
gets sidetracked very easily.
Well, the phone rings or customers come in or whatever. So
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a while for me to get it finished,
She's
but
like-
I will get there.
She's like a squirrel.
I am like a squirrel. I do get sidetracked very easily.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for joining. And we will see you here actually Friday night for our Friday Night Frenzy show. For anybody that's new, 7 o'clock Friday night, we go live. And we sell fabric at a really good price. And we open lots of boxes of new product. We usually have at least 10 boxes to open. Sometimes many more.
Just depends.
3 years we haven't had a weekend without boxes.
I know, right?
We've
Isn't
been
that
lucky.
amazing? Mhm.
Okay, see you. Everybody.
Okay.
Oh, Nancy's coming Friday.
Oh,
Can't wait to
okay.
see you, Nancy.
Friday.
Okay,
Everybody
bye-bye.
have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.